Hello and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. This time round we're looking at this little cutie, the Toyota 2000 GT. A massively influential car in its own way, and very low production, very low number made, and very valuable, dare I say it. But the real essence of this car is that it was a game changer in the Japanese car manufacturer's landscape and indeed the world stage. The Japanese car industry in the late 1950s, early 60s wasn't exactly sparkling. It wasn't setting the world on fire, to say the very least. And Toyota were so desperate to break into the States with some pretty average cars that even weren't up to driving on the highway for lengthy periods of time. They were dreadfully unreliable. I mean, it sounds like we're not talking about the same company as we have these days, but back then it was a very, very different story. And they sold their saloons in the States in the 1960s, and they were so desperate to sell them, they didn't call them Toyotas, they called them Toyopet, would you believe? Which sounds like the sort of, lovely, cuddly animal that no household could be without in the 1960s. So even that didn't work. And it actually got to the stage where they lost $1.5 million, which was a huge amount of money back then, in 1960 trying to sell these cars and failing. So they had to do something radical. Fast forward to 1965, Nissan, Toyota were both vying for trying to sort of get a real foothold in the lucrative US market and make some credible cars. And they had saloons that were beginning to come on, but nothing really wonderful, nothing fantastic, certainly no halo car. And as we know, history has shown that they absolutely knocked it out the park in the 1970s with things like the Datsun 240Z, Toyota Celica. I mean, monstrously successful cars, but things were very different. So let's go back to 1967. This car entered production. It's a very expensive car. It was a joint venture. It was developed mainly by Yamaha, the musical instrument makers, that was what they were primarily known for at the time. They'd been making musical instruments since the late 1800s. And fantastic quality musical instruments, even to this day. The C range of pianos, C3, C6, C7, are industry standard. They've got a slightly brighter sound than the Bechsteins or Bluthners or Steinways, but still a fantastically sort of reference quality instrument. And as I've said on many occasions before, the line between musical instrument and high performance car engine is very thin. It is a form of wind instrument. And that obviously was not lost on Yamaha. So they developed this car initially for Nissan. Nissan didn't fall in love with it for whatever reason. So Toyota started collaborating with Yamaha, and Yamaha designed the basic concept. So the engine, they took a very boring family saloon engine, the Toyota Crown bottom end, engine bottom end, a 2-litre 6-cylinder cast iron block, and Yamaha worked their magic with the engine. They designed a twin cam cylinder head for the engine, which took a fairly conventional and boring pushrod 2-litre engine and turned it into a lovely twin cam 3 twin choke carburetor engine that developed around about 150 brake horsepower. And this car weighs just over the ton. It's very light, so that equated to a top speed of around about 135 miles an hour, depending on which final drive ratio you specified. And this, for a 2-litre car in the 1960s, for any car, was moving 135 miles an hour. But this car, as I say, it absolutely turned the world on its head. In fact, it wasn't really immediately apparent how important this car was. Japan made very boring, boxy saloons up to this time. The American manufacturers thought they had the American market their own way, but then this came along. And it was 20% more than an E-Type Jaguar, new, so hardly any of them sold. But it was quite successful in various ways to start with. It sets 15 land speed records. And also Carroll Shelby took them over to the US and raced them very successfully in SCCA competition. This is the same Carroll Shelby who, if I'm not mistaken, said there's no substitute for cubic inches. And here he is with a 2-litre car. So it's a very successful car, but it really is tiny. And it's very aerodynamic. But the whole point of this car is it shocked the world. It sent shockwaves through the automotive industry because the Japanese are of nature interested in the nobility of detail, if you like. They're interested in what you can't see as well as what you can see. And the whole of this car has been obsessively engineered by Yamaha and Toyota. And it just abounds with flourishes of technical delight, really. It was the first Japanese car to have disc brakes all round. The dashboard, which is rosewood, was done by Yamaha's musical instrument department to give that fantastic mirror finish that they could achieve on woodwork. And the whole thing is just, every little piece of engineering is beautifully done. It's got a very lightweight independent rear suspension, which worked very well. The wheels are mag alloy, the latest technology at the time. So we actually restored this car about 3-4 years ago. And the car, essentially, the bodywork was good, but everything else wasn't really. So we had to start again. We had to do a lot of retrimming work to the interior and also mechanically. And the funny thing is, they made 351 2000 GTs in total. About 60 of them were left-hand drive for the US market, and the rest were right-hand drive for the Japanese home market and the rest of the world. And obviously a few of them did end up here. This has been here, I think, virtually from day one. But the funny thing is, we had another one in for work while this one was being restored. So we actually had two of them side by side in the workshop. And bearing in mind, these things can change hands for up to $1.2 million, roughly £800,000. I mean, they're incredibly sought after and incredibly collectible. So to have two of them here with a combined value of $2.5 million was quite interesting, really. But what we did when we were restoring this car, it gave us a fantastic canvas to work from on the other car because it had bits that this car was missing long since. One of the things we were able to replicate was the transfer, the engine data transfer in Japanese on the air filter housing. And we pretty meticulously got all the characters right on that. So I was able to say to the owner, we have got your engine tuning decal exactly as they had from new back on your engine. It's just lovely things like that which we can, which make it very satisfying. So the car's in for a tune-up. It's in for some work. We discovered that one of the petrol pipes that goes from the tank to the carburetors was in a very bad way. It was actually split and leaking fuel if you touched it. This is the problem, particularly with the onset of ethanol-based fuels. We have to be very careful about these things. I don't want to alarm anybody, but check your fuel pipes. It's very, very important on classic cars because the ethanol wreaks havoc with them, even at 5%. It eats away at bits and can cause problems. So yeah, if you learn anything from this video, it's check the fuel pipes on your classic car. I'll be going into that in another video at some point in the future, don't know when, but we'll have a look at what jobs we're doing on the car and also a couple of the really nice design facets of this, and then we'll be taking it out on the road and giving it a run. One of the clever things about this car is the packaging. The front wheel centerline of the car is quite far forward, as it is for good handling, but the engine is actually, it's what's called a front mid-engine. So the entire engine weight is behind the front axle centerline, which makes it very, very good from a weight distribution point of view. And one of the beauties of this car is the weight distribution is 51% front, 49% rear, which is sort of a halo moment for where a car manufacturer wants to be, because they get good traction, the weight distribution's equal, and the main bulk of the weight is within the wheelbase of the car, which means that you don't have, it's not like a sort of bob weight situation like a Porsche 911 with the engine slung out the back. So what I'm going to do is just show you some of the little ingenuity bits on this. As I say, it's all about packaging and it's all about weight. And what Toyota very cleverly did was they put an access panel on each side of the car, because this area here, certainly on cars of this era, on modern cars, they normally have huge windscreen washer reservoirs on them to cope with the big mileages that cars do nowadays. But at this era, this was just a void of wasted space. So what I'm undoing here is just a couple of screws to hold this little panel on here. And I can just give you an idea of how cleverly packaged this car is. So we just lift that off there, like so. Carefully rest that on there. And then we have an access panel. Under here is the battery, a weighty item, again, within the wheelbase to help the handling. And the same on the other side, you've got lots of components to do with the mechanical gubbins of the car, the infrastructure hidden behind there. So we just close that panel over and put this back in place. Beautiful, cleverly thought out, so simple, and yet you'd be amazed how many car manufacturers don't do that. So they have the battery either stuck in the back of the car or up top, raising the centre of gravity. It's down near the ground, it's within the wheelbase of the car. Bristol used this to great effect on quite a few of their cars. You had the spare wheel on one side and the brake servos and battery on the other. But so many manufacturers just didn't. This is what set this car apart and why it was such a game changer and why it was a wake-up call for the rest of the world. From 1 minute making boxy, boring saloons to saying to the world, we've arrived, move over, because Toyota is coming through. And boy, did they. Look at them now. Well, one other aspect of this car that's really interesting is these are not the headlights that you see here. These are driving lights. They're supplementary lights. The real headlights are something that are oh so cool, but that were killed off by safety regulations some years ago now. Pop-up headlights. Lift up your eyes and light up my life. Well, this car, when it originally arrived a while ago in the workshop, was missing various bits altogether. So we've had to use some improvisation and also using the other car as a template. One of these examples is these rather neat little chrome trims here, which James had to make from scratch. But they look quite cute now. We had them chromed at the time, and I would venture to say you can't tell them from the originals. These are called escutcheons. Can't beat a good escutcheon. Our brief with this car was obviously to restore it and bring it back to very good working order, but it wasn't to make it concours. And in fact, this is probably, it's used regularly, this car. This is probably the most driven Toyota 2000 GT on the planet. Well, one of the other interesting facets about this car is that it was a James Bond car, and it was used in You Only Live Twice, the Bond movie with Sean Connery from the 1960s, and he was actually filmed doing a very quick high-speed getaway in one of these cars, and it had a beautiful and very tiny Japanese actress playing his counterpart in Japan called Aki, who worked for the Japanese Secret Service. And the problem was that he couldn't actually fit in this car. His 6'2" frame wouldn't fit in it. So they ended up famously chopping the roof off a 2000 GT, two of them actually, so that he could at least, with the aid of some clever editing, get into the car without too much trouble. Anyway, enough of that. I'm now going to hop in the car and we'll take it for a run.
Well, there we are then. Good. Well, that went well. Feeling beautifully relaxed and ensconced in this tiny car. It's still a great piece of kit though. This beautiful rosewood dashboard, just still in magnificent condition. And if I can describe this car, it's sort of jewel-like. That's how I would put it. Everything on the car is like jewellery. These are, you know, these chrome bezels on the gauges. Sort of Bentley came out with those, very similar looking against the wood in the late 90s on their Mulliner spec Turbo R's and Mulsannes. But the whole thing is just lovely. I mean, this look has obviously been around a very long time, the chrome on wood, but it just looks great here. But everything is light. The dashboard is wafer thin. Mechanically, the car is very advanced too. You've got this lovely little slick 5-speed gearbox, which just clicks from gear to gear. Just lovely. And I'm just slowly warming it up at the moment. You know, Japanese had a 5-speed gearbox in this car in 1967 when Ferraris had just brought it out in the likes of the 275 GTB, the 5-speed box on a road car a year or two earlier. Jaguar had just brought out their new gearbox in the E-Type, which was a 4-speed all synchro box, but this is obviously very different. It's just driving great, really is. Again, it's not a frenetic ride, it's very much a 1960s ride, quite smooth, fairly laid back, and just gently bringing the car to life. Yeah, as ever, the car's just beginning to get into its stride now and come to life. Now that things have warmed through, it's very precise. It's got lovely rack and pinion steering, that independent suspension. I will just try the engine now it's warmed up a bit. Yeah, it goes well enough for a 2-litre 1960s car, it really does. That lovely 5-speed box that just clickety clicks into the different gears, beautifully precise. Synchromesh still works perfectly, no hint of gear crunching or anything like that. And yeah, it's difficult to remember that this car is worth £750,000 or thereabouts, because it is so small and so very in your face in one way with its precision this and precision that, but on the other sort of quite unassuming size and stature, but yeah, very sweet, just lovely. Quite happy to amble along. Very usable car, assuming you could get in and out of it. But yeah, just very sweet. Yeah, it feels sort of dainty, this car, if I can put it that way. Everything just feels quite dainty. I mean, the gear change is very dainty, just click and it's into 4th gear. The steering, again, is beautifully, you can just steer it with your fingertips. Very nicely set up car, this. I have no intention of pushing this car very hard out of respect for the car and the owner, but it just feels lovely. As I mentioned before, we have done a few jobs on it, but sometimes trying to catalogue them for these videos is difficult because it's all part of a commercial business and we have lift space and mechanic space and all that to worry about. It's sometimes not easy to show the jobs being done, unfortunately. It's something we'll aim to do in future videos a bit more, but it's not really feasible sometimes. But I notice we've got an electrical problem with the instruments. We'll need to sort those out, which Pete, our auto electrician, will do very easily. The rev counter's working, as is the speedo, but interesting, the speedo's in miles an hour. So they really did think of everything, because of course not many cars exported from Japan at that time actually had mile-an-hour speedometers. It was still in their infancy. But I will just open it up now that it's warmed through. Just a great feeling, that really is. This car, it just gives pleasure. No wonder it sort of set the standard in the day of various things. I mean, to have this suddenly appear out of sort of a dowdy, sort of supposedly dowdy company really was absolutely radical. Just feels so beautifully wrought and put together. Yeah, this car was shown a few weeks ago on BBC's Top Gear, and it's off for another appointment later on this month. So we really have just got a narrow window of time with it. We're going to make some new exhaust back boxes. Exhaust system is very similar to a Jaguar E-Type. No surprise there. I suppose Toyota had the E-Type in their sights, and we've got to do a couple of other jobs on it as well. But I really just wanted to take the opportunity. Fortunately, the owners, the JHW collection, were happy for me to do this video, and I just thought it would be a nice one to share, because it's not a car people ordinarily get to see very much. And when we had finished the restoration on this car, Toyota were themselves so pleased with it that they displayed it at Goodwood that year, which was lovely. Really nice recognition, really nice accolade. Yeah, this car just shrinks around you. It just feels like you're at one with it. It's so intimate, not just space-wise, but also control-wise. Just absolutely beautiful. We'll just open it up again. Oh, lovely. Just sweet. Brakes feel very reassuring for 1960s brakes. Yeah. Slick, clickety-click, go the gears, just lovely. What a sweet car this is, really. I talked before about this car being jewel-like in some respects, and interior probably more than anywhere reflects this. Every aspect has been carefully and methodically and thoroughly considered. This beautiful rosewood dashboard, which was done by Yamaha to sort of piano finish exacting standards, is still lovely. When we restored it, we took the dashboard out, all this came out, we recovered this, re-restored it, all the seats were taken apart and repadded. Even the carpet, we meticulously looked into the piles on the carpet, and piles are very important, as we say to our customers when they phone us inquiring about trim work. And even things like the handbrake, this beautiful ratchet handbrake which falls to hand, and it's perfectly natural just to go like that. It's much easier than
this. So nice little touch there, and the gear change is just lovely. Really precise, 5-speed, just an absolute joy to use, and everything's laid out clearly. It's just a very, very sweet car, apart from the fact it's worth so much, or maybe why it's worth so much. It's just a very sweet car. All this beautiful detailing. Yeah, it's a nice place to be. It really is. Well, that concludes another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop video. Hope you've enjoyed it. As usual, the lifeblood of these things is likes, shares and subscribes. So thanks for all that, and we'll be back with something else soon.